To love God. This is, we're back to Rabbi Hirsch, Samson Rapheal Hirsch, Horeb, and we're dealing with some of the words from the Shema, the central prayer of Judaism. This is from page 27, paragraph 54. To love God with all your heart, with your mind, and heart. For such is the meaning of lave, lamed base. To strive to reach God with your mind, employing all mental faculties which have been lent to you for recognizing God, for learning to know His will as expressed in His law and also His world, in order that you may know how to fulfill His will in it, in this world, with your heart, in order that you may be able to go through the fight to which God calls you, between the impulse which leads you upwards and the impulse which drags you downwards, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. And you may be able to make peace between the brute and the man in yourself, that you may be able to lift up the brute to the human level and make both impulses take one direction to serve God. To call only that good and honorable which God calls so, and to avoid that He wishes to be avoided, and that your heart should feel only one attraction to your Father in heaven. So this is a very full paragraph, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's dealing with your mind and your heart, right? So what Rav Hirsch is saying here is that you should have the intellect to discern between good and evil, right? And it should rule over the urges of the heart, right? So that because the urges of the heart may want to drag you down into an appetite that is not healthy for you, or lift you up into a very high level, right? And those urges exist within us, and the goal really is that your mind, which is your neshama working for you at this point, your soul, is to train the urges of the body to be uplifted, because they're very powerful and they're very dynamic and they're very strong, and if you can train them to be uplifted, then how much the better. Years ago an example was given of a person, sometimes people love pizza. There are pizza lovers in this world, or chocolate lovers, whatever, right? So what do you do with this desire to eat, to eat pizza, right, or to eat chocolate? In and of itself, it's probably not a very healthy thing. It's not the best foods that you could eat for your health, right? But if you were to combine it with something positive, that I'm going to really work hard to get to this point, right, and I'm going to reward my body with something pleasant for my body, right, if it goes along with this process, right? If it doesn't cause me to run off to the pizza parlor or to the chocolate store, but rather to sit and learn Hirsch, and when I finish learning Hirsch, right, I'm going to give myself a little bit, right? You have to be careful, because with these appetites, the more you feed them, the greater they become. So you want to make sure that the appetites you have are being used for the good. They can be used either for the good or the bad, right? It's very important that they be used for the good. So he's saying that you have two elements here, the mind and the heart, the brain and the emotion. They're both powerful. They're both given to you by God. You should recognize what is good and employ both urges for the positive, both urges of the emotion. And with all your soul and with all your might. This means that in the life which has been lent to you, he likes to use the phrase lent to you, right? And why is he using it, not the life given to you or your life, just your life, right? He's doing it because he wants to make something very clear to you. Any government that issues a passport, I have a passport, right? Here's my passport with my picture in it, right? My name, it's stamped, it's signed, it says this is me, this is my passport. When I go through customs, they say, can I see your passport? I give them a passport. Well, it's not my passport, actually. It actually belongs to the government. And at any time it wants, the government can say, we want your passport back. We've decided you shouldn't have a passport for whatever reason, criminal behavior, whatever, you've renounced your citizenship. We want the passport back because it says on the back of the passport that it actually belongs to them. Right? Hashem is saying the same thing, right? I give you life. It's not something that's yours. It's something I gave to you, right? To use properly. And so he uses the phrase, that your life, that things that have been lent to you, they're given to you for a purpose, right? That's his point here. So with all your soul and with all your might, this means that the life which has been lent to you, and in your physical powers, your health and bodily fitness, in the resources which you have acquired in the whole endowment which God has given you in the material world, money, business, honor, influence, friends, family, they're not yours. God has given them to you. Right? And in all of these, you may see only the means and the instruments for accomplishing that which God in His law has meant to be accomplished. Everything in your world are tools to accomplish that which God, the mission that God has given you, which your mind recognizes and your heart strives for. This is from the previous paragraph. So just as your mind and your heart will have only one direction towards God, so your life and your possessions will be dedicated to this one effort, and you will become single-mindedly and active, just as your God in heaven is one and creative. So this sounds like a totalitarian environment. Not so good, right? Everything is directed towards this, right? But in the back of our minds, we have to keep in mind that we should never confuse this with a human imperative, with a monarchy, right? Because this is all directed towards a being who is all-powerful, has no need, and is only asking you to direct it to it that you should have a better life. Right? So that we understand that a Jew, it's a painful thing to say in this world, has no rights. Has no rights. It's not a world of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It is a life of obligation of the mind, of obligation of the heart, of obligation of the soul, of obligation of the resources, obligation everything, right? Obligation to what? To God, right? Who gives it all to you, that if you use it properly, will give you a great life. Fulfilling the obligations is what gives you pleasure in life. So it's very important that, when a child on his birthday is given 50 presents, right? He's overwhelmed, doesn't know what to do with them. It would be better to give him 2 presents and the next day give him 2 more. Right? He's given all of them. Right? Hashem gives you this list of things that he just described. Right? But Baruch Hashem, you're a mature person, and he gives you the manual, how to use them, so that you don't end up using, the electric train set to keep the fridge door open, right? And you don't use the, electric knife to cut your nails, right? You use everything for what it's intended to be used for, and through that you get the greatest pleasure. Imagine if you used the garage door to start your car. It would be very frustrating, because you'd sit in your car and the garage door would go up and down, and your car wouldn't start. And you'd go crazy. Right? You don't do that because this starts my car and this opens my garage door, right? So what happens is that Hashem gave us all these remote controls, and he also told us which buttons to push and when, right? If we push them at the right moment to do them, right, we'll have a wonderful life. The car will start, the heat will come on, the TV set will turn on, we'll see the ball game, whatever it is, right? We won't have to drive through the garage door, it will open and we'll go into the garage. It's much better, right? Sure. So this is what he's saying. You have all these things, plus you have the manual as to how to use it, right? So if then your heart, your life, your wealth are only means for loving God, you ought naturally to love Him more than your heart, your life, and your wealth. You should never hesitate when it is a question between abandoning the ways of God or the inclination of your heart, to throw away the inclination, wealth, and life in order to remain true to God. right? You have to be prepared to make the sacrifices, sometimes extreme sacrifices, right? Because in a cost-benefit analysis, and this is the term, cost-benefit analysis, right? One will find that you may lose a great deal in the process, but the ultimate benefit is far greater if you just hang on to the creator of the universe, because his interest is you. And of course, again, we have to remember that in context that Hirsch is writing at a time not unlike ours, when the temptations to go off the derech, the temptations not to be true to God, were tremendous, as they are today.
That's the Enlightenment period, right? Everybody wrote
what?
The Enlightenment period.
Right, during the Haskalah, Enlightenment period. There's tremendous temptation to say it's old-fashioned, it doesn't work, it doesn't make sense.
Desert religion, right?
Yeah, and we see today that it seems that the world seems upside down in the sense that if someone's religious, it means they're intolerant, right? They're not tolerant, right? Or they're backward, or they're primitive, or they're unscientific, right? All these are big negatives, right? They don't get pleasure out of life, all these pleasures, and they don't have it. They're narrow-minded, right? So these are all things that are associated with detracting from a spiritual life. Right? At the end of the day, we know that people who have everything you can have in a material way, and every freedom that you can have or every lack of restriction is a better word, that you have in terms of the use of those resources, usually have very empty lives. And, in their later years, surrounded by, tremendous material success and wealth, seek a simple connection to something greater than themselves. Because you can't buy it. It's an interesting thing. With all these things, you cannot buy it. But if you take these things and use it for that purpose, you can maximize the material things you have in terms of the pleasure you get from it. So, shame on him who, turning means into an end and an end into a means, degrades the highest and exalts the lowest. That's what we're saying. Who, in order to increase his wealth, to enlarge his business, to win the respect of men, to buy friends for himself, to build up his fortune, he imagines, or to build up his friends as he imagines, or to satisfy his inclinations and passions, breaks even one commandment of God. The moment that you say, I can make more money by staying open on Shabbos. If I only added a cheeseburger to my menu, I could double my revenue. It's, first of all, not true, and even if it was true, you can be guaranteed that the benefits you have from it would go nowhere and would actually make your life more difficult. Double shame on him. Finish with one shame. Double shame on him. Who, for the sake of any such advantage, not only discards one command of God, one word of his Father in heaven, but turns his back altogether on God and says, I have no longer any share in the God of Yaakov. I will go to the nations who possess power and prestige, who are not given over to feebleness and restraint and contempt. Heaven and earth blush for him, for he has forfeited his human dignity. His heart has no longer any idea of holiness. The most holy merely amuses him.
Wow.
It's tragic.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And, of course, we see this, all around us. We see it. And when he says double shame, it's not just a wagging your finger. It's a double sadness. Particularly for the Jew, right? That everybody should cling to a spiritual thing, but the Jew is given a gift. He's given a gift with no effort at all. He inherits it from Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. It's there on a silver platter, right? It's more valuable than being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. The spoon can be taken away. This gift can never be taken away. Can you soil it? Can you do damage to it? Tremendous, right? Can you cover it over with disgusting things? Yes, you can, right? Will the gift be damaged from it? No, the gift will still lay there under the sewage, It's not going to, it's a piece of Hashem. So it's not going to disappear. And by the way, it will irritate that person because it's still there. So, I'm here, under all this, I'm here. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where there's a sound playing somewhere, right? And you can't find it. Either a cell phone ringing someplace or a very quiet radio just went on, or a computer started to play YouTube. It drives you crazy. Where is it? This is actually the gift, right? It's never silenced. It's muffled. It's covered. People put pillows over alarm clocks so it's still there, right? I have to wake me in the morning. My phone rings, right? It's a smartphone, so it has a crescendo, getting louder and louder and louder. I have to get up early, make sure that everybody's up. So there are days, right, when I'm really tempted to try and take it and put it underneath my mattress, right? So I don't hear it. But I know if I put it under my mattress, I'll still hear it. It'll still be there. Get up, David. Get up. Wake your son. Gotta go to school. Gotta go to shul. Gotta have the day going, right? This is actually what the Pintel Yid does to us, right? It never goes away. But how sad it is when we don't have the clarity of it that's given originally, right? And that's his point here, right? But Baruch Hashem, even in this situation, it's still possible to turn back around. That's good news.
Still turn around.
But you, the Israelite, listen. You shall love your God more than your heart, your life, and your wealth. And were you called upon to abandon your most passionate desire, to sacrifice your life, to give up your fortune, if you had to suffer torture and martyrdom, shame and contempt, poverty and misery, if you had to suffer death for yourself and your dear ones, suffer and remain faithful. We just read Parsha Shmini, right? And we learned of the death of Nadav and Avihu. And we understand that Aaron, it says, when confronted with the information, remained silent. Right? It would have been very possible for him to rage at God.
Yeah.
He lost his two oldest sons.
Yeah.
And he lost them when they were actually trying to bring incense to God. Right? How cruel.
Do we know how old his sons were at the time?
No, I don't know how old they were. No, they were probably in the 60s.
His sons are in the 60s.
I would think so, because Moshe was already 80 and Aaron was 86. So
his sons.
Probably they were
around for a while, right?
Yeah, they weren't 15 years old.
No, they weren't. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
So, how painful this loss must have been to him, and it maybe even seemed unjust to him. He remained silent. And Hirsch is saying here is you have to remain faithful. There are tests in this world. There are difficulties in this world. There are requirements to sacrifice in this world. We know it. And we have to keep our faith, keep our emunah. We're going to talk about this more in the next chapter, actually. The nature of faith and trust in God. Cast away everything which has no value without God, which has no value unless you can dedicate it to the service of your God. Cast it away and remain faithful. But learn how to deal justly with this self-sacrificing love, as God's law teaches you. Your desires and your property, and all that you call yours, except for your life, weigh less in the scales than the least of the commandments. And were you forced to abandon everything except your life in order to avoid breaking even one of the commandments of your Lord, you dare not hesitate. Now you notice he keeps saying an exception to this is your life.
Your life.
Pikuach nefesh, right? We don't give up lives easily, right? Because immediately when you give up a life, you can't do mitzvahs.
Yeah, we don't have it, yeah.
And God wants us to do mitzvahs and gives us the opportunity to do it. So God says, if somebody is sick, if somebody is in trouble, right, if they're in danger, right, pikuach nefesh, even my Shabbos you violate.
Yeah, you trump Shabbos, right?
That's right. That's right. The case is different with your life. Here he goes. If you are told to break any commandment of the Torah with the exception of those connected with avodah zarah, idolatry, gilui arayos, immorality, and sfikas damim, and murder, the blood, under threat of being put to death, then you should break it, with the exception of those three, provided that you have first sought but without success, even with the offer of all your earthly fortune to buy your release from sin and preserve your life further to serve your God. If your assailant, however, is not thinking of his own profit and only wants to make you break the law, and if this is done publicly, that is to say, to the knowledge of at least 10 Jews, that's how he defines publicly, right? Or even secretly, but at a time when some tyrannical power is trying to destroy Israel's Torah by violence, then account your life as nothing in face of the slightest sin, or even the infringement of a custom which is peculiar to Israel. In this case, God says to you, sacrifice your life, sanctify my name, and show in the congregation of your brethren that you love God more than life, and spur them on to similar love. Show the madman that his power is unable to force Israel into disloyalty to his God. Show him that Israel's sons and daughters mock at his puny strength, and that they will expire and will still remain true to their God. He's writing in Germany 100 years before the Holocaust.
The Holocaust, yeah.
Right.
But what came to mind here is the 10 martyrs in Rabbi Akiva, because he technically does this, right?
That's right. Yeah. And Rabbi Akiva actually says specifically, when his students ask him what's going on, is he said, I always wondered if I had the ability to love God with all my might, and my life itself, and my neshama. Right? Now I know I can. And that's a fulfillment. Right? It's hard for us to imagine these things.
Yeah, it's very hard.
You know, nobody suggests martyrdom. It's the last thing that... You know. But in fact, Hirsch is laying the groundwork for something that we understood happened in the Holocaust over and over and over again.
Wow.
And that was, there was an effort not just to kill Jews, but to debase Jews. Right? The idea of, cutting off men's beards, that were cherished by them. The idea of humiliating women in a number of different ways. The idea of violating children when you could. One thing after another. The goal was not simply to murder, which in itself is too much, but also to humiliate as part of the process, right? And what we learned through this process, over and over and over, the words of the name slips my mind, it'll come to me. One of the great rabbis was when he was beaten and kicked, right? And the Nazi officer who was doing it to him said, now do you think you're better than me, Jew? You think you are on the ground with broken ribs? Better than me in my uniform, the Gestapo uniform, my SS uniform? You think you're better? And he looked up and he said, I will never act as an animal. Whatever you do to me, I will remain human. I will never be an animal. Right? The man who was beating him was acting as a ferocious animal.
No, yeah.
Right? And by the way, I've had this conversation with other rabbis. That's a cruel thing to say to animals. Animals, predators, right, who we think of as wild and ferocious, never kill for pleasure.
No.
They work very hard and they kill to eat. Right? In the case of man, humiliation and this kind of murder is for something that no animal would even do. Right? But through this period of time, Jews, under worst conditions, maintained their humanity, took care of each other, right? Remembered who they were. Right? That you can physically debase me, but my soul remains my own. I know who I am. Right? And interestingly enough, this challenge, which is one that none of us should ever know again, of the enemy, remains a golden challenge for us now. where we have to remember who we are. And Hirsch is actually talking about this. Before the Holocaust came the Haskalah, came the good times in Germany, right? And the attraction to things that were not Jewish. And it was a forewarning in many ways for him.
64.
Laws, however, against idolatry, immorality, and murder, taken in the widest sense, have an importance of their own. If someone tries to force you to transgress one of these laws in secret, and not in times of threatened annihilation, and only for his own personal advantage, give up your life and do not commit the transgression. Your life does not outweigh them, says the law of God.
Wow.
So he's divided the law into two groups. One group is Avodah Zarah, right? False worship of false gods or falsely worshiping God. Gil Urias, immorality, usually sexual immorality, and Sfeik Damim, being forced to murder another person, a third party. That's one group. And he says under all conditions, you should be prepared to give up your life for this, and all other ones, you shouldn't give up your life, with one exception. Right? If you're forced to do it publicly, right? Or if it's at a time where it's going to be used to destroy the Jewish people, even the smallest law you should give up your life for, right? Which is interesting.
That doesn't want to compromise the Jews.
Yeah, where your public compromising of, lifting something on Shabbos that you shouldn't lift and moving it. Even that you shouldn't do because you're actually performing something at the will of the person who wants to destroy the thing. The motive is different.
Yes.
If again force is used not to compel you to transgress a commandment, but to make you abstain from performing one, then you should not sacrifice your life, since the performance of your duty is being made impossible for you without your being able to prevent it. So let's say on Pesach, right? You should be prepared, he's saying, if it's a public situation, to give up your life before you would eat chametz. Right? But if you're not allowed to eat matzah, right, you don't have to give up your life for that. Right? So it's the difference between a positive and a negative commandment. Right? Where the law says, neglect this duty and save your life, or transgress this commandment and save your life, you may not sacrifice your life unless indeed such sacrifice is demanded for the sake of further observance of the divine law. Because through such sacrifice you kindle anew in the souls of your brethren attachment and love to the law of God. It's what example is it? Otherwise, you should save your life, for God values the life which you preserve for further service to Him more highly than the abstention from this sin or the performance of that duty. And you may not sacrifice your life when your Father in heaven desires it to be preserved. It's a very important thing to understand. Is we don't believe in martyrdom, right? The willing martyrdom.
We don't blow ourselves up for.
That's right.
Ridiculous.
Right. But we don't even allow ourselves to be killed for the greater glory. Right? If we can live for the greater glory, right? It's God's constantly in the Torah saying, "I put before you life and death, good and evil," and then saying clearly, "Choose life."
Choose life.
So too in the case of illness. If it is a dangerous illness, you may seek to cure it by any means except by transgressing laws against idolatry, immorality, and murder. If it is not dangerous, you may seek to cure it by any means of forbidden food, provided it is consumed not in the usual way, and with anything the use of which is forbidden, provided it is not used in the ordinary way. Only the mixture of basar b'challah, meat and milk, and the mixed species of a vineyard are forbidden to you as a cure, except in the case of danger. Things forbidden by the rabbis may be used in the ordinary way as remedies even where there is no danger. But if eaten and drunk deliberately in the ordinary food, they may be used as remedies only in a case of danger. Food, for example, mixed with gall or the like, which would otherwise be unedible, comes under the heading of an unusual form of consumption. So this is an important point that he's making, is that we have laws of kashrus, right? Foods that you're not permitted to eat. So he's saying that if it's a cure that you're taking, that the doctor would recommend, that somebody who's qualified to recommend says you should take this, with the exception of a mixture of meat and milk, which is absolutely forbidden, you should take it if your health is at stake. Right? So, for instance, shark fins, right? Can't eat shark, right? But if the doctor says to you, or even worse, chazer, pork, I'm not sure it's worth it actually, but it's more famous. Mm-hmm. If the doctor says the only thing that will cure you, right, is to eat the hooves of pigs, that is, boiled, with shark fins, then indeed you have to have it. Now, there's a couple of things to take into account. You have to eat it in a way you would not otherwise eat. Right? You can't put it on your plate, mix it with a nice salad. Right? You would, for instance, maybe take it and wrap it in some paper and actually swallow it in the paper itself, right? So as to not have the taste of the food at all. You would, in some way, you would eat it, even if it meant chewing it a different way. Everything would have to be done differently than you normally do it. This is a principle, by the way, of when you're required to violate something rabbinic, is that you should not do it in the way you would normally do things.
The way I would interpret this is if you could say a pill. Because sometimes, like medicines with pills, they could have things in it that are not kosher. Right?
That's right.
You explained to me about medicines when Debbie was sick. Like you could have certain medicines that are necessarily not kosher, right? But I guess in an unusual way, you could say a pill could be something that's not right, but because you need it, you can consider that not ordinary way.
Which is, by the way, why we make a difference between, for instance, many, sometimes people have to have calcium additives, right? So they take a calcium pill, right? Most calcium pills, as I'm told by Rav David Shochet, are produced from oyster shells. Oysters are completely forbidden to us, shellfish. But first of all, the shell is not the food that one eats from an oyster. And second of all, it's been processed in a way that has no taste to it. Third of all, it is for a person's health, that he must have it. The doctor says he must have it, right? And finally, it's compressed into a tablet. So you're not actually eating it. We don't call that eating it.
That would not be ordinary way, right? Then.
Yeah, and by the way, one of the places we see this is at Pesach time. It's at Pesach, Jews who do not eat kitnios under normal conditions.
What's kitnios?
Kitnios is something that Ashkenazi Jews are forbidden to eat, which is legumes, rice.
Oh, rice.
Right?
Okay.
Sephardi Jews are allowed to eat it. We don't. So kitnios, but kitnios is something that is used very often. Corn starch is used to bind pills together, right? So if cornstarch is used as a binder, right, you can take that pill, right? More than that, it's very clear that if a person has an upset stomach, if they have diarrhea, one of the cures for diarrhea is rice.
Really?
Yeah, it's an ancient cure. It goes back to Talmudic times.
Yeah.
And it's specifically mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch that if an Ashkenazi Jew has this problem, he is permitted to eat rice, where he's not permitted to eat rice under any other conditions at Pesach, right? Why? Because his health is at stake here, right? So that's his point. There are a few exceptions to it. Basar B'Chalav is one of them, is because in the Torah it specifically says, do not cook the calf in its mother's milk. Right? So it's so clear that we don't do that as a cure. You're not even supposed to use it really as a salve, like on your skin. But you have to speak to your own Rav to discuss that at the time. but for sure you can't consume it. So now we move into a subject of tremendous importance, and I think we should, I don't know if we'll finish this tonight, but we should begin it. There's two words that are used interchangeably which shouldn't be used interchangeably. One of them we're going to read about tonight is emunah, right? And the other one is bitachon, right? Emunah is translated usually as belief or trust, faithfulness. Right? Bitachon is often viewed as putting that belief into action, right? As opposed to the belief itself. Right? Sometimes it's used as knowledge of God as opposed to belief in God. Right? It's more greater certainty to it. We're going to discuss these all in more detail as we go forward, but they are essential elements that Hirsch is going to talk about. So let's begin chapter 10. Trust in God, emunah. Right? Ye shall not try the Lord your God as you tried him in Massah. In Massah it was where the waters were bitter, and we said, what kind of God is this that gives us bitter waters to drink? And Moshe Rabbeinu was told, put the bitter tree into the water, and the water will become sweet by it. You shouldn't test God. And then again it says, know therefore that the Lord thy God, he is all-ruling God, the faithful God who keeps his covenants, his promises, and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. And he repays them that hate him to their face, to destroy them. He will not be slack to him that hates him. He will repay him in the circle of his desires. It's a very important concept, and we're going to talk about. Yeah. And so he's talking about reward and punishment. And we're talking about belief, faith. Emunah, trust in God. That's how he translates it. Means to hold fast to God, to his promise, to his law, to his grace, even though his ruling hand does not show itself in our experience and the fulfillment of his promises seem to lie far away, even though obedience to his law seems to threaten extinction, and all claim his grace seems to have been forfeited through sin. So there's a couple of very important points here. There's many reasons why people lose faith in God. You know, Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, the great Berdichever, once made a case that how can God have expectations to us? Imagine that a groom comes to the chuppah, marries his bride, and then leaves.
Leaves?
Then leaves. Right? You know, he hangs around for a couple of months, right, and then leaves, and goes away for years. In our case, 2,000 years. And all he leaves behind is some notes about, you know, how to take care of the kitchen, right? How to press my pants, right? You know, how to act with children if you have children, right? That's it. And he's gone, right? And he expects us for years and generations to hold on to it. It's not fair. This was the Berdichever's point. Of course, the problem with this is that God, before he hid his face from us, and his face is hidden from us. We don't see the daily miracles. We don't have the Beis Hamikdash. Gave us a great demonstration of who he was and the uniqueness of his relationship with us. And of course we celebrate this at Pesach. We celebrated at Shavuos, and we celebrated it again at Sukkot in different ways. And we're aware of these things, and they never leave us. So it's not as though God is not there, but it's as though he's kind of in the shadows. And rather than see God, we see the effects of God's will more often, which takes a little bit more work on our part. It's a little more work, but it's there, and it's not an excuse. Right? Another reason for losing faith is he uses this phrase, even though obedience to his law seems to threaten extinction, and all claim to his grace seems to have been forfeited through sin. You know, when Yaakov was coming back to Eretz Yisrael, and he was told, your brother Esau is coming with armies of trained and armed men, Yaakov went through a whole process of prayer and dividing his wealth and his camps, sending bribes ahead. Ask the question. God promised Yaakov when he left he was going to take care of him.
That's a good point.
Where's his faith in God?
Yeah,
what's going on here?
Yeah.
And the reason we're given, and it comes up in a number of other places in Tanakh, with the great patriarchs and the great figures of the Torah, when they seem not to have perfect faith, we understand that it's not simply, I give up on God. It's not that. With Yaakov's case, he felt that one of two things: that God had done so much good for him that he'd used up
his account is dead.
His account, yeah, that's right. He'd withdrawn too many good things.
Stuff,
right? Yeah. But the other one, which certainly applies to most of us, is that he thought, God has a covenant with me. I do X, he does Y. I do A, he does B. What happens if I don't do A? Is he still obligated to do B? Maybe not. Now, Yaakov never was in a situation where he didn't do A. But he felt, maybe I didn't do A to the level of perfection. So should I expect Hashem to do B to the level of perfection? Maybe I violated the deal. We have no covenant. We have no deal. That was his big fear. So when Hirsch says, to his law seems to threaten extinction, and all claims to his grace seems to have been forfeited through sin, it's through our own sin. What right do we have to claim that God should protect us and care for us after the lives we've lived? Right? It's a good question. At which point you can say, I don't have that claim on God, so I don't expect God to keep his part of the deal. I'm not keeping my part. Right? I'm going off on my own. Right? This is a very dangerous thing to do. If we feel that our sins have caused God to break the contract, we should know it's not possible. As long as we live, the contract exists.
That's why we have tshuva.
That's right. Exactly. Tshuva is there because God waits. He's very patient, waiting for that moment when we do tshuva. Let's continue. In God, quotes, in God. God tells us that he is the all-powerful, all-wise, all-just, and beneficent God. Yet, if you were to seek to follow his traces in the ordering of the world and society, you would find everything but not God. You would see the power, the caprice, the cleverness, the mind of man in control. You would see the righteous suffering and the unrighteous bearing themselves proudly. And you would see folly succeeding and wisdom put to shame. You would see chance apparently making sport of the happiness of men. You would see a generation perishing in sickness and need, in war and hunger, in vice. In astonishment you ask, where then is the omnipotence that controls the feebleness of man, the wisdom that rules over his folly, the justice that requires each according to his deeds, and the goodness that desires the well-being of its creatures? To me, when I read of Hirsch, it's as though you're reading a prophet, not just simply a teacher. I use this word cautiously, but there's an idea that a chacham can see the future, a wise person. Part of the definition is that he can see into the future without nevuah. You understand it. When he writes about this, right, you always have to remember he's standing at some of the most glorious moments of German culture and science. Right? He's also standing a century before the worst depravity that these same people will wreak. Right? And we as Jews have to understand where we are when we see all this glitter, right, amongst us. So when you ask this question, right, if God is omnipotent, how can there be so much vice and evil in this world? How can the evil seem to prosper, right? Mm-hmm. He says, then Emunah comes up to you and makes intelligible to you the purpose of divine power, wisdom, justice, and goodness. It bids you consider that if the omnipotence of God suffers violence to flaunt itself unchecked, if His justice distributes suffering here and joy there in a capricious way, if His goodness looks idly on the distress of the human race, then His wisdom must of necessity recognize the arrogance of violence, the maldistribution of good things of life, and the distress of mankind themselves as just and good. Somehow what we perceive to be evil, God must recognize as good, he'd say. And these things must represent justice and goodness, although you do not comprehend it. For will you, with your limited intelligence, comprehend the plan of God's wisdom? Emunah teaches us to hold fast to God, even if heaven and earth should testify against it. This is a very powerful, very difficult thing to accomplish.
Sure.
Right? Saying, when you see injustice in the world, understand you're seeing injustice with your limited vision.
Yeah, your scope is only so big.
That
you don't have the whole plan.
You know, how many times in our lives, in our small and tiny events in our lives, do we say, "Oh, this is terrible. You know, how could this have happened to me?" And realize 3 months later, if it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't have been better off today. That I lost the job that my whole life depended on, only to get a better job. You know, I had a very dangerous operation, only to be given 20 years of more life, you know, in this world. You know, the most famous ones are, you know, people who, you know, Rabbi told the story that he was making a left turn. I think it was him making a left turn, right? And the light was just turning, and he had one opportunity to make it. And he's about to turn, and he sneezed.
Oh, your eyes closed.
And he had no cold, right? And he sneezed, right? And put his foot on the brake as he sneezed, right? And in doing so, he prevented himself from hitting a person who ran out in front of his car.
Oh my!
Right? Now, the interesting thing was he didn't have a cold. He hadn't sneezed for weeks.
Oy.
Suddenly he sneezed, right, out of nowhere. And in sneezing, because you tend to lose control, it saved the life.
Because he sneezed, he went on the brake, which he didn't hit the guy.
Right.
If he would not have sneezed, he would have
He might have hurt somebody.
Oh my!
Badly, right. So you know, the sneeze was an irritation.
Yeah.
Right. But a moment later, he was rewarded by knowing, hey, that irritation saved that guy's life, or saved an injury.
I think
so. And this happens in our lives constantly.
Sure.
I think.
I think that what Rabbi Hirsch is saying here also is that sometimes we don't have the whole picture. Like if you were to zoom up on a small segment of a beautiful picture, and you saw like something you couldn't make out what it was, you could say, oh, this is junk. But if you zoom out, go away from it farther, you see the whole picture, some beautiful painting.
Absolutely. You know, there's very often on science movies, Discovery, stuff like that, one of the things they like to do is start with a close-up of an eye of a person, and then zoom out and out and out and out and out until you're outer space and looking at this, what my friend Michael Lemley calls the beautiful blue marble. This unique planet in the world, right? When you get far enough away, you know, the sewage that's there, the evil that's there, is suddenly replaced by saying, what a stunning gem it is in the universe to look at, you know, something teeming with life and color, where the rest of the worlds around us seem quite grim, you know, compared to this. It's like a garden shining there, right? But you only see it from a great distance. Up close, it's like I just stepped in dog duty. Right? From a great distance, there's no dog duty, right? It's, you know, so it's a question of where are we you can see things, and we have to remember, right, that the universe that God perceives is that one, that sees how everything fits together, that sees how everything fits together this moment and throughout the universe, that God is not an entity that perceives this comes after this comes after this. That time didn't exist until God invented time, right? Which means that all things, and it's hard to get your noodle around this, but in God's world, all things happen simultaneously, right? Everywhere in the world, throughout all of history, everything happens simultaneously, and God is able to perceive it. You know, I know that younger people can often watch a computer screen with a number of different things going on in it quite easily. The ticker tape below, a split screen above, you know, a little box on the side with another thing. And then, you know, it can make a person dizzy who hasn't been trained to this, right? You know, some people call it multitasking. But it's a very hard thing to do if you've trained your whole life to comprehend what is in a frame. Right? Suddenly it's 8 frames inside frames moving around, and they're changing. There are people who follow this. Usually younger people follow this very well because they've grown up and their brains accept it. That's a tiny example, and one should never compare anything a person did to what God did. But is it to say that everything happens simultaneously in God's universe, and yet is not a mishmash? It's all very orderly. It's exactly the way Hashem wants it to be. We unfortunately get to see, as you put it, you know,
very small
part of it, which doesn't give us perspective.
Sure.
We're on 71?
Yes.
Look at the hint which the Torah gives you. It's from Devarim, Deuteronomy 7:10. Will you criticize God's justice? Do you understand the justice of God? Suppose that what seems to you to be injustice is the product of the highest justice. You are dumbfounded by the prosperity of the wicked. See, says the law, God is just. He rewards for their goodness even those that hate him, and would gladly see him removed from the scene, in order that they may be no bar to their wrongdoings. Even these God rewards for the good they have done, but he rewards them in the sphere of their desires, and in the sphere of their desires he repays them. This is a quote that we just read from Devarim. What does it mean? It means that a man lives his life with no spiritual grounding. His only desire is greater and greater wealth, to amass greater and greater materialism, right? And it seems that's the only thing he does, right? And by the way, he happens to be very polite to the elevator man in his condo, right? You know, every year he gives him a nice gift at the beginning of the year. He's going to benefit from this, by the way. It's not as though his kindness is
for him.
But he's making sure that, you know, when he rings the buzzer, that the elevator guy goes right up to his floor right away. He's concerned that when he comes out to get a taxi, that the doorman jumps to go out there and get that cab for him. But he tips well. It's a kindness that he shows to, say, employees, right, that he benefits from. God notes that. Even though he's unscrupulous, even though he's an idolater, even though he's an adulterer, even though he doesn't, recognize God in this world, he does some kind things to God's creations. God says, well, I don't like to be in debt.
Yeah, doesn't want to owe.
I don't want to be in debt. And soon enough, he's going to be 120, and if I don't pay him now for these kindnesses he's doing, then when he comes before me in judgment, he's going to say, I'm entitled to a good place in the Olam Haba. Look what I did for the elevator man.
Yeah.
Look what I did for my secretary. Look what I did. So I'm going to make him rich. I'm going to give him his condo that he wants. I'm going to give him another one in Miami, right? Make sure that he's got, his Porsche that he's concerned about, whatever it is, because I'm going to reward him in the sphere of his desire. The tzaddik says, My desire is in the eternal world. My reward, I want to be there. And if something hurts here, because, I spoke harshly to somebody, and I'm paying the price now, right? So be it. Because the sphere of my desire is in your Olam Haba, right? Which doesn't go on for 120 years, right? We know the metaphor that was used, if there's a huge mountain the size of Mount Everest, right? And it's made of sand. And every 10,000 years, a bird flies to the mountain and takes 1 grain of sand away from the mountain. Right? When the mountain has disappeared, right? That's only the beginning of Olam Haba. That's what eternity is. Yeah. So when you weigh
grams and every 10,000 years.
So when you weigh which pleasure you want, right? You have to take that into account. So the point that he's making here is a very, very, very important point, and it gives you a better understanding of the world, is that in all cases, he rewards them in the sphere of their desires. In the sphere of their desires, he repays them, right? He's not in debt. So if your desire is in Gashmias, in this world, materialism in this world, God rewards you there. That's where he pays you on. And if your desire is in spirituality in the world yet to come, right, he punishes you here and rewards you there. If their activity is selfish, if it consists in earthly and external wrongdoings, if it aims only at external and therefore transitory prosperity and joy, then their reward is also in the transitory. Let them enjoy their transitory wrongdoing, wealth and prosperity, and perish like what they have required. But for those who seek only Hashem, the eternal, and choose the fulfillment of His will as their life's task, for those who pursue only the eternal, the reward is also eternal. For 1,000 generations they remain as a blessing with their doing and striving, their suffering and sacrifices. Look at the patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov. The whole of humanity was to be their reward. See below. And they themselves were without home or country, living in the future. Are you really good? Can you rate so high the transient well-being of the wicked? I mean, think about what they wanted. Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Right? Abraham in his life had to beg for a place to bury his wife. The pain that Yitzhak suffered with his son Esau, and Abraham with his son Ishmael. Where is the justice in it? The justice is in everything came after. And see, says the law further, only those that hate him, only the incorrigible, does God reward within the sphere of their desires. To those who are capable of improvement, God gives suffering in order that they may improve themselves, and misfortune in their greatest good, fortune, while good fortune was their greatest misfortune. Let silence, therefore, hide your lack of understanding and hold fast to God. History is just, for its director is a perfectly just one. We can hold here, right? And we have to close with an understanding that even in our own situation, and we're going to talk about this much more as we go forward with Emunah, we can see that all of the nations that came before were rewarded constantly in their world. The Romans had great empires, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, we can go on. The Reich itself built huge, it should dissolve from history, machmo. But it built huge monuments to itself, right? Over and over and over and over and over. And where were we? We were despised people. We were people who were in great pain, kicked from one country to another. We would have moments of glory and then be kicked again. Right? And now where are
they're all gone.
Greco-Roman empires?
Yeah.
Where are the Macedonians, Alexander the Great? Where is the Russian Empire? Under the Tsars and under the communists, right? Where is Maximo, the Reich? They're all gone. There's no, all there is book learning left of it, history of it, right? Actors playing it in movies, right? But today there's no actor who's playing a sage. We have sages who go back to the original sources, right? We're live, we're dynamic, we're there, and even though Hirsch doesn't know it in his works, we have our land back. This afternoon was Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israeli Independence Day, right? It's a great and glorious day that we have back our land. No, we don't have the Beis Hamikdash. No, we don't have Mashiach. It should happen tonight, right? But we're close, right? We're much closer, than Hirsch was. And his still to come was the Holocaust, the terrible suffering of the Holocaust. Then was to come the beginning of the land, which will culminate with the building of the temple. Mashiach, B'mehera Amenu, should be now, and the world seeing the light of Torah. Right? And all of this is dependent on these people who never gave up. That's the point, is that you can't value by the moment. You have to value through the scope of time and history, which God can do, but we have trouble with. Right? We should see in our lifetimes and in the lifetimes of our children the fulfillment of the prophecies, that the temple should be rebuilt, and we should see the glory of Hashem in this world. It should be recognizable, and the nation should come to the mountain.
Amen.
Amen.